It's a pretty good time to be a fan of Assassin's Creed. There's currently multiple projects in development, and Ubisoft has already given us some insight into a few of them. So we've got the upcoming Mirage, which is set to take the series back to its roots, Project Red, an RPG which is set in feudal Japan. That's been one of the most highly requested historical time periods for the franchise, and Hex, which will apparently be a totally new type of experience. Even for people who are already familiar with the franchise, it's going to be something totally new. And that all sounds great, but right now I want to talk about Assassin's Creed Invictus. Personally, I'm a really big fan of multiplayer. I always like to have some kind of PvP or co-op mode available, as long as it doesn't feel too tacked on and it has some depth. When it's done right, I think it really enhances the longevity and value of a game. Ghost of Tsushima Legends is probably one of my favourite examples. So when Ubisoft announced a competitive multiplayer mode was launching with Brotherhood back in 2010, oh my god, I feel old. Anyway, it took a lot of people by surprise, because it just didn't make sense. How would PvP work in an Assassin's Creed game? But honestly, they totally pulled it off. The gameplay was a cat and mouse experience where you had to blend in with the crowd to avoid other players and assassinate them using tricks, traps, mind games. It just felt really true to the main stealth pillar of the franchise at the time, and there was nothing else quite like it, and there hasn't been since. I'd say the closest thing we have to it now would be Among Us, where you're constantly on edge thinking about who's trying to kill you. It's not so much about the action, it's the thrill that comes from never knowing who's watching you, when they might strike, and successfully taking out your targets. Unfortunately, the PvP mode was dropped after Black Flag, and hasn't made a reappearance since, but it looks like that could be about to change. What we know about Invictus is that it's going to be a purely multiplayer experience set within the Assassin's Creed universe, which is a first for the series. It's going to launch as part of the cross-title Infinity platform, which will be a hub that connects all future games in the franchise. Invictus is a Latin word meaning unconquered, so the speculation is that it's going to be a PvP focused game, and it could also hint to ancient Rome as the historical setting. So while we don't know much for certain, many fans are assuming that this will be a revival of the classic multiplayer mode from Brotherhood with a fresh coat of paint. And while that would be really cool, I think there's one piece of information that's currently being overlooked, which could give us another clue as to what Invictus will actually be like. The development team for this title includes veterans of another Ubisoft game, which also happens to be one of my favourite multiplayer games of all time, For Honor. Now, if you haven't played For Honor, first of all, I'd highly recommend trying it out. It's pretty cheap these days, and it's had a lot of support from the developers since it launched in 2017. It's set in a fictionalized version of history, where knights, samurai, Vikings, and other factions live alongside each other and fight in a huge war for supremacy. Its primary mode is a 4v4 PvP battle arena filled with weaker enemies called minions, so it has some similarities with a MOBA. So if you're into historical combat, it's definitely worth checking out. Speaking of the combat, the actual combat system in the game is called the Art of Battle. It allows you to attack and defend in 3 guard stances. So it's kind of like a rock, paper, scissors mechanic, but there is a high skill ceiling as you have to feint and psych out your opponent so they don't counter you. It's one of the best PvP melee combat systems out there in my opinion, and I think it's significant to point this out, the fact that these developers are working on the PvP Assassin's Creed game, because PvP in Assassin's Creed may be about to evolve. Melee combat is quite difficult to implement in PvP. You can't just lift up the Assassin's Creed combat system and drop it into a PvP mode. It doesn't work like that. You would have to completely redesign and balance it from the ground up for multiplayer, which is probably why the original multiplayer focused on stealth and didn't have a combat system. But now, Ubisoft already have an exceptional melee combat system for player versus player, which they've built with For Honor. So rather than start from scratch, why not translate that into the Assassin's Creed universe? The original multiplayer that started in Brotherhood had a somewhat convoluted narrative. Everyone was playing as Templars in what was essentially an animus training tool. So if I remember correctly, the sort of narrative excuse was that they wanted to train Templars in the stealth tactics of assassins. But with this combat system, you can have a true assassin vs Templar experience. If they manage to blend the stealth aspect of the original PvP with the combat of For Honor, that would feel like a complete Assassin's Creed multiplayer experience. 2 of the main pillars of the franchise are stealth and combat. So if you blended those 2 aspects of Assassin's Creed multiplayer and For Honor together, you've covered those bases pretty well. And now I want to take it even a step further, and this is just pure speculation, or more of an idea that I have, but just hear me out because this could be really interesting. So imagine this blend of Assassin's Creed's original multiplayer and the For Honor combat system. Now, there's a third game that I'd like to introduce to this melting pot of ideas. It has been a long time since we've had a Splinter Cell game, and some of you might not even know that Splinter Cell had its own PvP mode called Spies vs Mercs. Now, Spies vs Mercs is what's called asymmetrical multiplayer. So you've got two opposing teams that are not equal. Not only do they have different weapons, but they have completely different styles of gameplay. The Spies play in the classic Splinter Cell third-person perspective, with the advantage of maneuverability and spatial awareness. They can take cover, they can hide in shadows, use the environment to get the drop on the other team. They've got low health, but they make up for it with various tools that they can use to distract and confuse the mercs, as well as night vision that allows them to see much better than the other team. Now the mercs play in a much more claustrophobic first-person view. They've got flashlights which allow them to hunt down the spies hiding in the darkness, but this also makes them easier to track and avoid. They have thick bullet-resistant armor and high-powered weapons, and as a spy, taking on a merc head-on is basically suicide. But if you can sneak up on them or work as a team, then you can take them down. So it creates an extremely tense dynamic of who's the hunter and who's the hunted. It's a lot of fun, and as you can see, Ubisoft used to excel at these type of inventive and unique PvP experiences. So how could this asymmetrical concept work in a game like Invictus? I envision it as the assassins being the spies and the Templars being the mercs. The assassins have stealth, parkour, tools, light armor, and the Templars have heavy armor and powerful weapons, and that would create the asymmetric dynamic where the assassins have to use the environment and teamwork to take on the Templars. Now, if we go back to the Art of Battle system in For Honor, there's classes in that game. There's various different ones, but for this concept I want to focus on the heavy class and the assassin class, and I think you can kind of see where this is going. The assassin class has less health, but is better at dodging, has better speed, and the heavy class has more health, stronger heavy attacks, and is usually better at grapple moves, and so on. You get the idea. So, let's set the stage. You've got a city map with rooftops and alleyways and civilians wandering the streets. The Templar team have to escort a high-value target from one end of the map to the other, and players can choose one of 4 subclasses focused on melee, ranged, and so on. So the Templars are slower and they can't use parkour effectively, but they deal greater damage and have more health. The assassin team has to use various methods to try and kill the high value target, and their subclasses allow for abilities such as disguise to blend in with NPCs in the crowd, like the original Assassin's Creed multiplayer, to use ranged weapons, tools such as smoke bombs for distraction, and so on. So the assassins can use the rooftops effectively to gain advantage and plan their attack. They can fight toe-to-toe with the Art of Battle system, but it's highly recommended to team up with at least 2 assassins to 1 Templar, unless you're very skilled at the Art of Battle system. Essentially, Templars can kill assassins with 1 or 2 successful strikes in a fight, whereas it would take 5 or 6 strikes to kill a Templar. So the idea is that the assassins always want to use subterfuge and avoid a direct fight as much as possible, whereas the Templars want to catch the assassins out and corner them where it's difficult for them to fight one-on-one. If you manage to get the drop on a Templar player as an assassin, you can kill them with a takedown instantly, but if they catch you out, it's going to be a difficult fight. So you have 2 very different gameplay styles for each team, each trying to outsmart the other. The Templars trying to find the safest routes, spot the NPCs that are acting suspiciously that are actually players in disguise, and keep close to their leader. The assassins are trying to find a weak spot in the Templar defense, plan ambushes, use traps and distractions, and I think this would be the ultimate Assassin's Creed PvP experience. You get 2 very different but equally satisfying experiences, but I guess we'll have to wait and see how Invictus actually turns out. So let me know in the comments, are you looking forward to hearing more about Invictus? Do you prefer a traditional solo Assassin's Creed game? Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.